Hello, everyone. My name is Dean Amhouse, and I am the President and CEO of the Water Council. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Again, welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the 2021 Water Leaders Summit. Unfortunately, last year we could not get together and we had to punt and to maneuver, and we held a series of podcasts last year. And unfortunately, with COVID this year, we are still in a situation that we're not able to come together in person. But we think we've put together a strong program for you that covers many important topics, from gray infrastructure to climate change to ESG to buildings. But everything that is related to that all brings back to water. There is a connection to water in all of this. And I think we are been fortunate that in some ways, while this is virtual, it has allowed us to be able to bring in Ed from Hawaii as an example, as well as bringing in people from an audience that may not have been able to attend Milwaukee. I'll say too, the city of Milwaukee right now is kind of a little bit of a crazy time with the Bucks going through the whole final game for the NBA championship. So it's a good time. Wish you are all here in Milwaukee. So let me start the session off with our first Brew pitch. Throughout the whole series of the summit, we are going to show one of our brew companies in the beginning and at the end. We are very pleased that we are able to conduct our Brew 2.0 session in February, where we help companies that have gone through an accelerator to really advance their efforts and to be able to build their connections and networks in within the water industry. So with that, Nick, could you go ahead with the brew pitch from Aqua Membrane?
My name is Craig Beckman. I'm the CEO of Aqua Membranes. And if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that business as usual is no more. And this is especially true when it comes to environmental stewardship. Microsoft made a bold claim last year that in the next 10 years, they will actually become water positive. This means no more water usage at their data centers. And the technology that they use at many of those data centers, as many of the industry uses, is reverse osmosis. It has become the industry standard over the last 20 or 30 years for production of high purity water, everything from your home to industrial uses pictured here. About 160 billion gallons a day is processed through the technology, and it provides enormous benefit. However, it comes at a very high cost, and that's waste. To make that amount of good water, we actually have to send 50 billion gallons of water down the drain every day. And to put that in perspective, if that was actually used for drinking water in human use, it could actually supply 2.5 billion people their minimum daily water need. That's like a third of the planet. Why is the technology so wasteful? Well, it actually goes back to the beginning of when the technology was first developed. We used this mesh feed spacer. And for the last 50 years, we haven't changed the design. A membrane element like reverse osmosis is an envelope of membrane wrapped around a center tube, and then it has this feed channel where the water flows. You can see it pictured here. And this feed channel is very susceptible to fouling without a lot of crossflow. That crossflow requires energy and water. Aqua Membranes has a solution. We can actually do a customized 3D printing process called printed spacer technology that allows us to replace that feed spacer. You can see it pictured here. What we actually do is take a liquid resin and cure it in place on the membrane surface and replace that mesh feed spacer that requires so much energy and water. This allows us to use less water, to use less energy, to actually increase the output of existing systems, and to extend the membrane life. Let's look at just one aspect. This is a typical home reverse osmosis system you might find under your sink, and it makes 50, maybe 100 gallons a day of purified water. But to make that much good water, it actually has to dump 40, 50, 5-gallon buckets down the drain, or 200 gallons of wastewater every day. If we put our technology in that same element, that would actually be reduced to only 25 gallons, almost a 10x improvement in the amount of waste associated with this product. It's a large market segment. $3 to $4 billion annually are purchased of reverse osmosis and other spiral wound elements. At this point, Aquamembranes is going direct. So we're going to serve this industrial market. It's about $800 million of annual purchase. The other three large segments, point of use, desal, and process separations, we're looking for partners. We have a fabulous team with a lot of experience, both in water technology and venture investing. We have over 160 years of combined experience. So how can you help us solve this huge problem? Run a trial. We would love to talk with you about how we can save you water and energy, or maybe expand your system in the same footprint. Perhaps you don't run a system, but maybe one of your portfolio companies does use membrane technology. Suggest that they run a trial. And lastly, let's just keep the conversation going. Together, we can definitely solve this problem. My name is Craig Beckman. I'm the CEO of Aquamembranes, and I thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you very much, Craig, for that informative presentation. Now, as we get underway, I'd like to have Marissa from SignalWire do a little bit of housekeeping for you all in terms of how you can raise your hand when we get to the Q&A, ask questions, so on. So Marissa, could you do a little bit of the housekeeping? Thank you.
Hi all. So we have a chat function at the bottom right of your screen. If you click on that, it'll pop open, and you're welcome to add any comments, questions you have in there, anything you may need. The question mark in the top right-hand corner of your screen, if you have any technical difficulties, if you click on that question mark, you can start typing to our support team and they can assist you with anything that you may need. And we have a raise your hand function. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little hand and it says raise hand on there. When you click on that, it'll actually highlight your box in green around your picture, and we can see who that is. And we can call on you during the Q&A time. You are muted and do not have the capability to unmute your microphone. So just know we will call on you, unmute you, and then you can begin asking your questions. Again, if you need anything, feel free to write in the chat or click on the question mark. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Marissa, for those instructions. And Nick, if you could unmute Jim Stern, and then I will begin with a quick introduction. So very pleased to welcome to our session Jim Stern, who most importantly for the Water Council is the chair of the Water Council. And he has served as a board member for several years. A.O. Smith is a founding member, founding partner of the Water Council, and so it's been wonderful to have a long-standing relationship with A.O. Smith and especially with Jim Stern. And Jim serves also as the general counsel and executive vice president at A.O. Smith. And with that, I will turn it over to Jim for a few remarks.
Well, thank you, Dean, and hopefully you all can hear me. I did the mad scramble this morning when my computer wouldn't let me in, and so I'm now on my iPad. So welcome to our Zoom world. But thank you again, Dean, for the introduction. I want to do my introductions today with kind of two hats. One as a senior leader at one of the founding companies, and then secondly, as Dean mentioned, as chair. My current role is chair of the board of directors for the Water Council. So as Dean mentioned, A.O. Smith, along with Rexnord and Badger Meter, were one of the founding industry participants in the Water Council. And A.O. Smith sees considerable value in being a part of and involved with the Water Council. So over a decade ago, Paul Jones, our former CEO at A.O. Smith, and Rich Musin, former CEO at Badger Meter, got together and helped found the Water Council with government and academia and the like. A great deal of indebtedness from an A.O. Smith perspective to all the rubber chicken dinners that Paul did to kind of get this off the ground with Dean and Rich and Todd. Paul's devotion to the Water Council really has borne great dividends for A.O. Smith in our involvement. And our benefits have been access to people. We've hired people from the Water Council or folks that we've gotten to know from the different companies that have been associated with the Water Council. We've benefited greatly from the innovation activities, whether it's the Brew in seeing startup companies or the Tech Challenge, which has been very successful in recent years for us in looking for and access to innovations that are around the country and around the world. And I'd say even most recently, our activity with the corporate water stewardship pilot. You'll hear more about that as the summit goes on, but we've really benefited from that. Another item of our membership that I think has benefited A.O. Smith is our association with the Water Council helps us with our government affairs work in Washington, D.C. Being associated with the Water Council gives us access to other champions in the water space that may not have otherwise been as well known to us, but from and through our connection with the Water Council. So it's really allowed us to engage a number of different folks within our organization with Dean and his organization. So if you're not a member, I will encourage you to become one. So as board chair, I take the Water Council into its second decade. A lot of clusters, a lot of organizations like this do not necessarily follow through after their founding members retire or move on. But there's a great foundation here at the Water Council, and it was because it was originated not only with just industry, but it was with utilities, it was with academia, it was with government support. So that diversity of perspective, that interest from all those different organizations provides a spectacular foundation from which we can continue to grow from. We've had some really good accomplishments over the last decade. The Global Water Center, if you haven't been to Milwaukee and visited Dean and the companies that are at the Global Water Center, I encourage you to do so. We've attracted companies to relocate in this area, whether it's complete relocation or opening up a North American office in Milwaukee. That has added to the vibrancy of the networking and the Water Council. And we've hosted dozens of startups relative to the Brew organization at the Water Council and virtually this year. The pandemic has stretched the team to think outside the box, and I give them a great deal of credit for how they conducted the Brew this year virtually. So as our board of directors has looked at our next strategic initiatives, we really feel that the first decade we focused on innovation, and Brew and the Tech Challenge and the Water Summit and the thought leadership have been great. But as the world continues to dialogue around ESG, I think this next decade is going to be a good focus on water stewardship. Dean and the team and others will talk more about that over this Water Summit. But I really do think that's an opportunity from Matt Howard and the work that we've done with the Alliance for Water Stewardship and our own activity around the corporate water stewardship pilots that we're doing today. So, as an organization that at its heart is all about convening and connecting and showcasing our members, I invite you to become a member. This is a member organization. Everything we do is trying to benefit our members through those connections, through those networking, through providing innovations and thought leaderships. While we are located in Milwaukee, we have members throughout the country and quite honestly throughout the world. And that is the strength of our organization. And Dean and his team can connect you with them. So whether you're looking to hire someone, whether you're yourself looking to be connected in the water world, connect with Dean and his team. Because I'll say this, the Water Council, one of our greatest assets is the fact that Dean has been executive director, CEO since the beginning. And he's had great support from Amy and Karen and Matt, and most recently now with Laura and Stacy. Great team to serve our members. So welcome to this year's 2012 virtual Water Summit. Unfortunately, we're not together, but technology allows us to be together virtually, and look forward to seeing all of you next year. And as a hometown homer, I just wanted to end with Go Bucks.
Thanks very much, Jim. Hopefully, I don't know if you're going to be able to get down to the Deer district, but I hear that they've got now 65,000 they're talking about tonight. So it's going to be quite a wild party.
Well, I will be at the game if I can get there through the 65,000 people.
Right.
But no, it's a great electricity for Milwaukee, and it's a great way to start off the Water Summit.
Great. Thanks very much, Jim. Appreciate your comments. Let's get started. And with that, I am very pleased to introduce to you Charles Fishman. Charles has worked with us for, I think now 5 or 6 years as our principal moderator for our Water Leaders Summit. A few years ago, we realized that we wanted to move away from the traditional breakout sessions, that people wanted to be able to hear all the speakers. And I will say that people also got very tired of the traditional PowerPoints. So you're not going to see any PowerPoints except for the Brew pitches. That's the extent of it. Charles is a master at leading the conversation, a journalist who I became acquainted with when he wrote the book, The Big Thirst. He's written a book most recently about the moon landing as well. And with that, Charles, I'm going to turn it over to you and to lead the session with Ed. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone, and welcome to Ed Sniffen live from Hawaii. I'll let you guys do the math on what that means about his generosity of spirit. This is my 6th year helping moderate and plan and organize the conference. And I am delighted to go to Milwaukee every summer, and I really look forward to being back in Milwaukee next year. It's one of the moments when I get to sort of feel like part of the water fraternity and not just a journalist, and I really enjoy that. One of the things Dean Amhouse and the folks at the Water Council have always encouraged in this conference is for us to try and break some boundaries, not do things the normal way. That's how we come to have Ed Sniffen with us on this beautiful Tuesday. He's the second in command of the Department of Transportation in Hawaii. So why is he with us? What's he got to do with water? We're about to discover that. Ed's with us because one of the themes of this year's conference is to really take in the reality of what's happening with water and climate change across the country and around the world. And one of the ways to do that is to look at the impact that climate change and the water impacts of climate change are having on various kinds of infrastructure. It's the year of wild weather events and wild without a smile, really bad weather events. It's the year of finally getting not just infrastructure weak, but it looks like a real infrastructure bill. And Ed wrangles with all these problems every day. Ed is 48 years old, born and raised in Hawaii, one of 9 kids. Those of us who have lots of friends from large families know that everybody always wants to know what number you are in the order. Ed's number 5. So he's got siblings above and siblings below. That's why he's such a good manager. And we're going to jump right in. Ed, one really interesting thing that I read about Ed is that when he and his family are going places in Hawaii, his wife often drives specifically so he can pay attention to the roads that he is nominally in charge of maintaining. That must be really entertaining for his and his wife's 3 kids. Dad providing a running commentary on the state of the roads. Ed, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, I suspect you will want to ask questions. You can raise your hand at the end. We're going to go till about the top of the hour or a minute or two after. But you can also simply type your questions in the chat as they occur to you. That's not something we can do when we're in person. We ask you to hold on to your questions. When you think of it, put it in the chat, and we will get to the questions at the end. One of the things Ed is really good at, as I hope we'll make clear, is getting things done. It's easy to have great ideas. The question is, how do you make things happen? So good morning, Ed, and I'll let you say hi, and then I'll ask you the first question.
Good morning, Charles. Thanks so much for having me here today. Aloha from beautiful Hawaii. This is what it looks like outside, so don't have to show you anything else right now.
The shades are up on all his windows. And Ed, by the way, is also part of he was born and raised in Hawaii, went to school in California, worked in Oregon, I should have said this, and has worked both as a private sector engineer and in state government back and forth for the last 20 years on the mainland, back in Hawaii. He's also part of the State Association of Highway Transportation Departments, and he is chairman of the Resilience Committee. So he and his colleagues in state transportation are constantly thinking, how do we keep roads sustainable given what's going to happen? But Ed, I want you to start out with a story you told me that has nothing to do with roads really, and nothing to do with water either. That's the story of how you and the Hawaii DOT got involved in broadband. Tell us about your broadband effort and where that led you.
Absolutely. We're pushing forward on a $25 billion project to connect 8 communities in Hawaii that have been traditionally unserved or underserved with broadband. And of course, our last year event with COVID pretty much highlighted the need for broadband in different communities. I mean, it was a human right at the time. It's as important as electricity and water. So when we started pushing forward on our projects, we were looking at connecting our system better. We're trying to resolve congestion issues throughout our state, and we don't have any
road congestion.
Absolutely, road congestion issues. We don't have land to build more highways in. It's too expensive. We're landlocked, and it's an inefficient use of resources for us to expand our highways into our beautiful environment. So we're trying to use technology instead, pushing to connect our entire system, our state and our local systems, to ensure that we can control any intersection we want. We can put in any data collection devices we need, and we can have our system communicate with any vehicle that's out there and through people's cell phones.
So I'm sorry, hang on one second. The original idea was that you needed to connect your own infrastructure completely to the internet. You needed Hawaii DOT needed its own high-speed network across the 8 islands of the state.
Absolutely. We wanted to ensure that we could connect everything and be as efficient as possible. While doing that, we recognize that our infrastructure, our state and county roads, run adjacent to or into communities that are underserved or unserved by high-speed broadband at this time. So we decided that we're going to extend our network into those communities to make sure we can connect them. It makes total sense to make sure that we connect our residents and our beloved communities to each other and to the world. But we didn't know if it makes sense to the US DOT, who fund us. So we put out our arguments with them. I was preparing for 2 days to make sure I could argue the point, to let them know our traditional job is to connect people to their goods and services and opportunities. Traditionally, it was physical, whether a walking path, bicycle path, or a roadway, to ensure that they can get to their destinations. Nowadays, especially during COVID, it's virtual. So we were pushing these arguments, and in the first 10 minutes, US DOT said, yeah, we agree with you, which was huge. I mean, these are funds for non-infrastructure.
How often does that happen? So, okay, so let me interrupt you again. Just so we make sure we aren't missing this. You guys decide your own road network and infrastructure needs a high-speed network. And then in the course of that work, you think someone realizes, wait a minute, we're bringing something into communities that themselves don't have access to it.
Absolutely.
A lot of state DOT people would say, okay, that's fine, but we're DOT. Those, I'm sorry about those communities, but we aren't an internet provider. We're a state, a department of state government. What was the switch? Was it you? Who was it who thought we're right by a village or a small town or community that doesn't have high-speed internet access and it's zooming right past them? Why don't we offer it to them? And what was the before you get to the federal government? What was the reaction in your own organization?
Well, the questions came initially when we started deciding we're going to push this into communities. When we started deciding at the DOT that we're going to assist our communities in reaching their connection goals. Our legislature questioned us on why us. Our administration questioned, is this an appropriate use of our funding? So we had to have those conversations locally first before we could push it nationally. But in the end, everybody agreed that our resources in DOT are our resources statewide. So if we're looking at solving our statewide issues, I can no longer look in my little compartment of jurisdiction. I must consider what the state's goals are, what the state's needs are, to ensure that I accomplish my mission and assist our residents in moving forward in the long term. We all know Hawaii can't export. I mean, there's nothing that we can efficiently export. So we have to build our broadband capabilities now to be competitive globally as we move forward. So for me, this is just a small step. This $25 million into 8 communities is just a small step to the $800 million that's necessary to upgrade the entire state so we can be globally competitive.
Okay, and one more thing. We'll move on to get to some water. In the process, and you sort of slipped right past this, you actually redefined the State Department of Transportation. So pause and sort of just expand on that for 30 seconds. The state transportation departments used to be unabashedly called highway departments, right? They're about roads. They're about dump trucks and pavers and lane line painters and in a place like Hawaii, restoring things that get washed out or overcome by lava. Why is providing internet access part of the potential responsibilities of a State Department of Transportation? You said it, but I really just want you to say it again.
Not at all. This is a big shift in our mentality, in our approach to things. Initially, our division or department was just a project-based department. We would put out a project to build this infrastructure for this initiative, for this area, and never really considered how we manage the system itself. So when we started expanding our thought process into managing our system, looking at delay times on the system, looking at how we can resolve the system, it occurred to us that our system is not just a physical one anymore. The needs are far greater in connectivity or connecting our residents to goods and services and opportunities that they need than just the physical system. So we had to expand what we believed infrastructure is. Infrastructure has to go beyond just the roadways, have to go into areas where our residents are trying to connect. We have more people going on telehealth visits, more people telelearning, more people working from home. So that is now our infrastructure piece that we're expanding into. And this goes beyond just this infrastructure consideration. It goes beyond just broadband. When we start considering infrastructure, it's those resources that are necessary for us to maintain the quality of life that we need. So it goes beyond just broadband. Why not consider our watershed as infrastructure? Why not consider the reefs that we depend on for fish and recreation as infrastructure? We say it is, but we don't put money into it.
You don't treat it. You don't treat it as if it is.
Exactly. So that's the expansion that we're looking at.
Okay, and I love that. I love the idea of wetlands as infrastructure or reefs as infrastructure. I've never heard that before. Of course, in this country, infrastructure sometimes means neglect. So maybe we just need to be careful. We already successfully neglect our wetlands and our reefs. But there was actually, you went wide. There was a simpler line you used with me, which was the Department of Transportation's job is to make sure that people in Hawaii have access to what they need to get goods and services, to go get them or to have them come to their homes or offices or businesses. And the internet is now one of those critical pathways that people get goods and services delivered by. And so it's as much our responsibility, if we can do that at DOT, as anybody's responsibility. And I just thought that was a crisp and really interesting way of framing it. Okay, we've spent a lot of time on the broadband story. I like the way it shows how you guys in Hawaii aren't just thinking differently. You have a different idea and then you push forward. Take a step back and tell us what the road system in Hawaii is like. I think we all have an image of Hawaii. Many of us have been there. When I've been to Hawaii, I will be honest, I don't think about the roads very much, or maintaining the roads, or how they're designed. What's the state of the roads? How did they end up where they are and in the condition they are? And what's the intersection between climate change right now in Hawaii and the roads?
Well, for those who have visited Hawaii, thanks for coming down. And I really hope you enjoyed yourself here. When you were here, you would have seen that our roadway system is a series of belt systems. So it goes around the major islands, which is really cool because it gives you great views of the ocean. It gives you easy access to the communities that we all live in and to the beaches that you want to get to. The difficulty with the system that we have, that belt system that we have, is our roadways are definitely in danger of sea level rise. I mean, every day we fight with sea erosion of the roadways in different areas. About 15% of our roadways are being eroded daily that we have to combat. When we start looking at our inundation maps for the year 2100, assuming that we have a 1 meter rise in sea level and associated groundwater, we're looking at about 20% of our roads being inundated at the turn of the century. Fully understanding that by mid-century, those roadways are going to be impacted severely by shoreline erosion. So that's kind of the state of the roads themselves that we're trying to deal with right now.
Okay,
When we
hold
look
on
at-
one second. Hold on right there. You've said three really important things. The roadways go around the edges of the island. So a lot of the important state roads are literally right there where the land meets the water. You said 15% of the road system you guys are responsible for right now is eroding, is actually under assault by that intersection of water and roads. You said by the end of the century, you have maps that show that 20% of those roads will literally be underwater, which means the land they're on will be underwater. And of course, it won't just stop wherever the guardrail is on the land side, that water's coming in. And you said we can consult our inundation maps to see what's going on. So there's a lot going on there. Pause a moment and tell us what inundation maps are and where they came from. Like, do I just Google inundation maps? What are those and how did you develop them?
So the state of Hawaii worked on inundation maps, modeling what inundation would look like from sea level rise and associated groundwater level rise internally, and how it would impact our state. We worked with our University of Hawaii and our state climate change commission to ensure that we had these inundation maps developed to ensure everybody can see what the conversation is, what we're actually looking at.
Okay, hang on one second. So you've got a set of maps that show decade by decade or every 5 years, whatever it is, here's what the science says is going to happen. As groundwater rises, as sea level rises, here's where the water's coming in. And those are a state tool that everybody people don't say, yeah, but you're using those inundation maps. I've got these over here. Those are an agreed upon framework for having this conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
And they don't show good news, it doesn't sound.
Oh, gosh, no.
Gosh, no. Okay. And where did that, give us just 20 seconds. Where did those maps come from? Like, who said we need them? How long did that process? I mean, that's obviously a tool you guys rely on every day now. Planning relies on it. I assume real estate developers, real estate agents, homeowners, landowners, all kinds of people turn to the inundation maps and say, what am I looking at? When do I have to sell before I'm in trouble? Where did that come from? Did that start 2 years ago? Is that a project that goes back to 2007?
It goes back till 2013 when it was pushed forward.
Okay.
The funding, the request for funding, the organization, and the like. And the maps came out in about 2018 that we could depend on to move forward. So now we have a website in the state of Hawaii where you can look up what inundation will look like within the years based on the models. It came from a coordination between our University of Hawaii and our Office of Climate Change to ensure that we had something to talk about. As we all know, the difficult thing with climate change and with future sea level rise is that it's a 800-pound gorilla that lives far in the distance. Trying to get that gorilla up in front of us to ensure that we understand that we need to take action sooner rather than later to address it was the big difficulty. As we all know, we're trying to address these concerns, but we have concerns today. We have congestion issues on our state highways now. We have safety issues on our state highways now. And it's easy for our legislators, for our leaders in the state to focus on those issues now and not necessarily on the ones that are coming up in the future. So bringing that forward, showing everybody what it's going to look like and showing everyone the steps that we need to take to address those issues timely was important.
Okay, and look, again, part of what we're trying to do a little bit is draw a line between the traditional way of thinking and a way of thinking that's going to be required to get us through the next 10 years and to get us ready for the next 40. Broadband is part of transportation. That's one version of that. Inundation maps you can rely on it is another version, but the tradition in highway departments is our job is to make sure the roads are where you told us to put them and that there's a lane in each direction or 2 lanes in each direction and that the yellow lines are bright and the white lines are bright, and when it washes away, we rebuild it. You and I actually talked about this legendary highway all the way at the opposite end of the country, North Carolina's Highway number 12, which runs along the Outer Banks, almost exactly like Hawaii, different ecosystem. And that road has been, I actually looked it up after we talked about it, that road has been washed away 6 times in the last 8 years by storms and hurricanes. And the North Carolina Department of Highways says, our job is to rebuild the road. We may notice that it's washing away every 9 months, but our job is not to imagine why that's happening or think differently about it. Our job is to rebuild it. In talking to you, give me your reaction to that strategy and how that applies to Hawaii. What are you doing differently than the North Carolina Department of Transportation would be doing?
Yeah, I can understand their direction and why they're doing it. But as we talked about before, we can fight with Mother Nature all we want. We're going to lose. And in the end, we got to talk about what's most feasible and what's most efficient for us in connecting our system. Part of the discussions that we have with the state of Hawaii is for those roads that are being impacted right now, we definitely must protect them with a soft revetment as much as possible to ensure that people who use them right now can depend on them and use them safely. While we're planning
what's a soft revetment? What does that mean? Protect?
So in the past, what we would do if for DOTs, I got a road, and at all costs we're going to protect it. So we would put in a soldier pile cantilever wall. We'd spend $30 million on it, and we'll put in something hardened to ensure that the sea won't touch it at all. Which of course leads to more erosion of the beaches that are in front of it, which of course leads to more portions that we'd have to harden. That was our thought process in the past. We worked with our University of Hawaii to ensure that we built in revetments that dissipate energy and don't lead to significant erosions of the shoreline that are outside of the hardened area or the protected areas. And that's only our interim solution now to ensure that the road is safe to use. while we plan out how we relocate it or how we reconsider the connectivity in that area. I don't want to fight with the water. I'm not going to win that battle.
You just said something really important. How we reconnect it or provide access in the future. That doesn't sound like when a summer storm washes away 6 miles of a road, or when there's a huge landslide, which happens all the time as a result of storms in Hawaii. We just gonna get the bulldozers out and the pavers out and redo it. You're looking at these inundation maps. Do you look at those roads and think that road is doomed? We need a strategy?
We're looking at the roadway system and we're trying to consider why it's there. So initially, all of our roads followed traditional paths that were already in existence from Native Hawaiian days. That was the easiest paths for us to follow. Those paths went through areas where people were living. So on the north shore of Oahu, in Haula and Ka'ava, we have communities that live off the side of the road. That roadway is there to service that community. That roadway is going to be inundated by the year 2100. That community that lives off to the side of the road is a foot below that roadway. So really, I
shouldn't be laughing.
Right. So if I'm looking at shoreline erosion of that roadway and rebuilding that road continuously, and considering whether or not I'm going to elevate that road or relocate that road to connect that community, I got to consider, is that community still going to be there? So those are the thought processes that we have when we looked at those inundation maps, fully to appreciate what land use is going to look like as we go forward, because that's the driver of everything. I need to ensure that I can connect our communities to the goods and services and opportunities they deserve. I got to know that the community is still there. And if not, I got to determine whether or not that road is actually even necessary to be there. Now, even if that community is there, I got to determine whether or not a road is the best way to connect that community in the future if that road is inundated. So those are the determinations that we got to make before we start knee-jerking into significant expenditures into the system. When we talk about the 20% of the roads that will be inundated in the near future and by 2100, when we calculate it out, it's about $15 billion worth of improvements that we'd have to make if we just relocated or elevated those roadways. I mean, that's not a small chunk of change. So we want to make sure that when we start moving forward on these types of investments, it's the right ones. So at this time, we're just using those protections just to ensure that those roads are dependable and safe while we start planning out what the next 10 years and the next 30 years are going to look like on our system.
Okay, but once again, you've sort of drawn your own circle a little wider, right? Okay, we can make sure the road's there, but the community is actually in more danger. The community that is the reason the road is there is in more danger than the road. And causing you to say, what's going to happen to the community? And what's your answer? You have this very you and I talked about this really interesting strategy, not unlike the broadband strategy, of asking the question: are people in Hawaii living in the right places now, given what we know is coming? Don't have wishful thinking. Here's your inundation map. If anything, it's going to turn out to be optimistic. It's not going to be conservative. So you're asking, are people in Hawaii living in the right place? First of all, is that an acceptable question from the second in command of state DOT? And more interesting, when you ask that question, what happens? What's the answer?
I think it's absolutely appropriate coming from me and anybody who's running a state department. I mean, we should all be looking at our missions based on where our residents are going to be in the future. So for us, when we start looking at those communities that are living in areas that will be inundated, we need to have policy decisions sooner rather than later that let everybody know what our future intentions are going to be. A couple of the discussions that we've been having with our legislators and with our administration is that we need to let people know who are living in areas that are going to be inundated by the turn of the century that we're going to take care of them. we are obligated, because we allow them to build in those areas, we're obligated to address the concerns or the needs that they have.
So you're not abandoning anybody who's in place now, whether they live in a small village or they've got a seaside villa, so to speak.
Not at all. We have an obligation to make sure they're serviced.
Right.
But that being said, if those people who own the property now decide to sell it, I think we should be telling them that we don't want anybody moving into that area that isn't there now. So part of the discussions we had with the legislature is we should have a bill that's put in place, or a law that's put in place, that says, if you're going to sell your property that's going to be inundated in the future, you must divulge that to the person that's looking at purchasing your property. And that person who's purchasing your property must know that if they buy in that area, I no longer have an obligation to service them. The state no longer has that obligation. So that should change the mentality of everyone looking at moving into areas that are inundated. It's a significant.
Again, let me interrupt you. You're saying something that is both commonsensical and also radical, right? You're saying we at the state have an obligation to take care of the people who live here now, who are Hawaiians, and who have a particular place that they live and bought that place or moved into that place with a certain set of expectations. We're going to provide roadways and power and water and sewer service to them. But we've got our map, and we know what places are not going to be sustainable to live in 30 years, in 60 years, in 90 years. If you sell that property to a new owner, it's not fair to sell it without saying, by the way, the inundation map says 2077 for this property. Just like you have to disclose the condition of your roof, you have to disclose liens or other holdings, you have to disclose, termite damage, whatever, when you sell a house, right? Floodplain. But if you, now, and just to be clear, that requirement doesn't exist yet. Is that right?
No, does not exist yet. That's correct.
So my first question, so that's a way of beginning the transition, of bringing reality to the world of these soon to be or eventually to be inundated communities. You guys are fine. We're taking care of you. When the property changes hands, you got to tell people, and then our obligation to help you rebuild if there's a bad event. We'll take care of you right up to the moment that everything is washed away. Once it's washed away, we're not coming back because we know what that means. Well, that's a way of moving people back, of getting them into the right place. But you just took my $2 million waterfront Pacific Ocean villa and made it worthless. Why would anybody buy it? So how do you do that? What's that can't be very popular with legislators, with people living in ordinary houses, or with people living in really expensive houses.
Absolutely, and not at all popular with any of them, but realistic. When we start looking at where people are and if they're in the inundation areas, it's better to have that difficult conversation now before we start having it when they are impacted in the future by sea level rise. If we can start that conversation now, we have steps that we can take. Potentially, the government could buy out those properties and could potentially lease it back to those owners to live there in the time frame. So we could recover some of our investment in that area, fully understanding that we now own it. We're allowing people to live there, and we can move them out when it becomes dangerous. So we can take those steps now. If we wait to have this,
I love the idea of letting people be where they are and then warning them, and then you're actually, again, this is radical but brilliant. And you and I talked about this. You could say to people, here's the inundation map. We know what's coming. This is like a weather map or gravity. It might happen 2 years later. It might happen 4 years sooner. It's happening. We're going to offer to set a market price for your beautiful property right now before the bad news arrives. We at the state of Hawaii, we will buy your property from you and lease it back to you up until the moment, again, of disaster. So you get to recover your investment. That's protected as a homeowner, business owner, property owner, we get to recover what we paid you, on a month-by-month basis by leasing the property back. Your life doesn't change. Instead of paying the mortgage, you're paying us. Instead of paying rent, you're paying us. Then at the moment something really bad happens, both the homeowner or the property owner or business owner and the state of Hawaii are in a much different position. That's a very interlocking set of decisions that all have to train along together. It's also completely the opposite of the way, that's not North Carolina Highway 12, washed out in January, rebuilt by March 1st. We gotta keep everybody whole. Mother Nature will do her thing, but so will we. And it's not the tradition of flood insurance in the United States, where communities get absolutely devastated and then the flood insurance fund comes in and they just rebuild on stilts and off they go. So is that going to happen? Is that realistic? And how do you move that through the people listening today might well be nodding their heads. Okay, that makes sense. In some ideal world, we can barely get people to install rain gardens, to help manage stormwater. How does the conversation go? Like the flood map, the inundation map, obviously is a starting point. What happens next? What's going on?
So the conversations have to occur, have to continue, and it has to happen on multiple levels, not just from advocates in the community, not just from the scientists at the University of Hawaii, and not just from the administration that's required to take care of the roadway system and the communities that are there. It has to happen throughout those different levels continuously until we get that change and until we get that adjustment. For us, we're finally getting some footholds in the discussion. When we started looking at the temporary protection of our roadways with soft revetments, we're also looking at extending out beach replenishments in different areas to ensure that we can start recovering some of the beaches to protect our roadways as we go. So we're showing that there's improvements that we can make in the short term to give everybody resources that they can use now while protecting our roadways. While in the long term, we can start deciding what we can do for the community. Because we're taking those midterm steps that are improving life and the quality of life for our residents, the legislators are more comfortable with saying, hey, we can start talking about bad news because we're giving them some good ones right now. So my message to everybody is we cannot just hit the gloom and doom button. We cannot just say, here's the problem in the future, and this is how we must deal with it, regardless of how people feel about it. We got to be giving them those real short-term solutions that'll give them more out of the community than they have right now. For instance, in Kava and Haula, as a small kid, when growing up in Hawaii, we had 9 kids, so we're dirt poor. So the great thing about Hawaii is there's a lot of no money fun to be had, right? We can go to the beach and
a lot of no money fun. I like that.
Yeah, you can go to the beach in Kahuku and hang out out there. There were beaches that extended out 200 feet beyond the highway at that time. If you go out there today, it's 20 feet. There's been that normal erosion and accretion that occurred in the past was disrupted by hardening in those areas. So we lost the beaches in those areas in a lot of spots. What we're trying to do is work with our land and natural resources to redevelop those beaches through a passive system that helps us replenish them. Hopefully to give it back to the community while we're protecting our roadways in a better way. We can get rid of our soft revetments after the beaches are replenished. That's the give back. To ensure that people understand that we're not just looking at taking away what you have. We're not just looking at that negatively impacting your life. We're trying to give you something in the interim so that we can start talking about what we need to do within the next 10 to 30 years to prepare for the end of the turn of the century.
Okay, you said we have to talk about this. There are lots of things we have to talk about. We have to talk about retirement. We have to talk about giving people secure health insurance. We have to talk about climate change, which we're talking about today. And you clearly have a calm, appealing, not hysterical, not politically ionized, personal manner, which I think really matters, right? But when you say we have to talk about it, what reaction do you get? Do people say, okay? Do they say, I don't want to talk about it. Or let's talk about what you're going to do for me in the next 2 years. Or, there's potholes over there. You're talking about buying $2 million homes and renting them back. And that's that's some crazy stuff. How about you paint the lane lines?
Yeah.
What reaction do you get? You live in the United States just like the rest of us.
So before we can talk about anything outside of highways, we got to show that we can take care of our base mission. Have to. Otherwise, nobody pays attention to what you're saying beyond it. We couldn't talk about broadband if we were taking care of the condition of our roadways in this area. And we definitely wouldn't be able to talk about sea level rise or climate change impacts if we weren't making sure that we took care of the roadway safety and durability throughout this portion. Now, given the need to have this conversation, it's the funny responses that we normally get is totally agree with you. From a legislative perspective, from a community perspective, we totally agree that this should happen. But you're not really talking about my property, right? You're not talking about my area. Right? There's things that we can do there, right? So that's always the conversation that we got to get through first. I'm not being subjective about this. All I'm doing is looking at the science. We have models that show that your area is going to be inundated. When it is, we need to have some solutions in place to ensure that you're taken care of before then, you or the generations that follow you. If we don't have this conversation now and start systematically addressing this, when it does happen, it's going to be a nightmare for everybody involved. If we can do this before inundation occurs in that area, it'll be a lot simpler for the government to take care of and a lot simpler for our residents to deal with. So those are the discussions that we have, and we've been able to take those first 3 steps in those areas because of the discussions.
What are the first 3 steps?
First one was to make sure that we protected the roadway with software weapons. Second, to make sure we work with our land and natural resources to help replenish the beaches in those areas to protect the roads as we move forward. So we have plans in place to do that. And the third is that
hang on, good roads, and here's the beach you may remember from your childhood or teenagehood. And by the way, the road department helped make that possible. And by the way, it provides a cushion for both the road and the communities adjacent for a little while. Okay.
Exactly.
And then I'm sorry, point 3.
Not at all. And then the third conversation is to get Office of Planning and the Land Use Commission all involved to ensure that we start making good decisions based on land use in the future. So it's not just DOT saying, hey, your property's gone. We're not going to service you. Now it's our Land Use Commission and our Office of Planning that's saying, that's the overarching planning body for the state, saying that this is the science. This is what we're looking at as a general plan for Oahu on developments for residences. This is where we cannot be anymore. This is where we could relocate to, and this is how we could address the new connectivity of your system to ensure that we service the public that we have. Those are the steps.
Right. I'm sorry. You made another really important point, which is even if DOT is all behind you, despite without putting too fine a point on it, transportation departments are a little like water departments. Old, traditional, conservative. Don't tell me something newfangled. I got to make sure the roads work, just like I got to make sure the water works when I turn the tap on, right? Mm-hmm. But what you said was we need allies. We need like-minded people, in your case, in planning and land use, because those people are actually charged with making a lot of these decisions.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let me pause this discussion. You told a really interesting story about road projects and high school students. I want to ask you to tell us that story. Then I've got a final question, and we've got questions piling up. Tell us about how the highway department and the high school students got tangled up with each other, and then what happened.
For us in Hawaii, as I said before, anytime our departments move forward on their missions, we have to consider what the overall priorities of the state are. One of them up there, and this is for every state, I'm sure, is education. Making sure that we educate the youth to come up with a better thought process of their environment, their state, and the processes by which they can live by. Giving them a whole new perspective, hopefully, in the jobs they want to go into. Also for us, when we go out to communities, we want to make sure we connect with them, to talk story with them, to ensure that we get their feedback to make our projects even better, make sure we can service everybody. The difficulty for us in the past is when we went out to different communities, we would get the same 5 or 10 people coming out that say they speak for the community. Those same ideas, those same thought processes, just from that smaller group. So when we started going out to look at corridor improvements that that we require for different communities, we started working through the high schools, connecting up with them to make sure we put in project-based learning collaborations to ensure that we can give that educational experience to the kids.
Hang on one second. You're getting the kids involved in understanding how road projects work. Hey, we're coming to your town. Have you ever seen how a road gets built? They look boring. They're actually not boring. Here's 3 things we can show you, essentially.
And not just educating them on our processes, allowing them to help them educate us on the real needs of the day-to-day. I mean, we have people that live in the different communities that we service, but not the way that everybody else does. So those high school kids bring in great perspectives without any biases from the adults or from our processes in the way we should improve things. We also wanted to give them the opportunity to do something for their communities. So they could look back and point back and say, hey, that new improvement in this area, I helped with that.
When I was an 11th grader, I worked on that.
Exactly.
And then what happened? There was this wonderful sort of, I think, surprise.
The great thing about all of this is when we started getting the students involved in the roadway improvements, in getting their ideas and getting their innovation in it, the parents started getting involved too. So when we started going out to communities to get more involvement, it was there. The parents, the communities wanted to get behind their kids. So we got a lot more people coming out, giving us a lot better ideas and a lot more feedback in the improvements that we can make that would make life better for everybody. So it was a win-win for all of us.
I love that. Once you can't get grown-ups to go to a road meeting unless the road is going to take 6 feet of their front yard. But once the 10th grader is talking to the Department of Transportation as the parent of 2 kids just out of high school, I absolutely would have gone like, what are you tangled up in? Why? Yeah. And so then you get input from a slice of the community that you need to hear from, but that would not traditionally be coming at you. A quick question about the big picture. You're on the Resilience Committee of the State Association of State Highway Departments. What's the mood? You guys, or at least Ed Sniffen as a representative of all of Hawaii, you guys are pretty progressive. You're thinking about this. You're trying to bring realism and a future. Let's not just solve the problem for next summer. Let's solve it for 20 summers from now. What's the mood among your colleagues? Is there creativity? Is there urgency? And do they feel like they have the kind of political support they need to do what you're doing?
So yes, and yes right now. The cool thing is, the cool thing is, initially when I was in private industry, looking at working in the public sector was both a nightmare and a dream, both ways. The dream is transportation touches everything. So if you really wanted to get involved in improving your communities in your state, you can get involved in anything you want if you're in transportation because it touches everything, whether it be social services, broadband, environment, whatever it may be, it's in your wheelhouse in transportation. So that's the dream. The nightmare was that government operations are set up to ensure that nobody messes it up. So if you look at the processes and policies that are in place for normal government agencies, they're lined out specifically so a 5-year-old could do it, which is good if you're in risk management, but really, really bad if you're in innovation. I mean, there's no creativity that comes from those kind of straight-line processes that are locked down. The great thing we're seeing, though, in all state agencies in AASHTO, especially in the Resilience Committee, is that everybody's breaking down these barriers now, fully understanding that innovation is necessary for us to address all of the concerns that we have coming forward, not only for the future in sea level rise and climate change, but also today to ensure that our economies are running, especially after COVID, ensuring that we stop killing 40,000 people per year on our highway system. All of those ideas or all of those processes require us to innovate. And so what I'm seeing in the committee is these great creative opportunities are coming up for everyone to push forward on. And everybody's looking at each other saying, hey, this is what Hawaii did in this area. Awesome. We're going to do this. Colorado and Utah put together a collaborative in one of their corridors that was impacted tremendously by storms to ensure that they improved it efficiently. So everybody's looking at that as the study on how they can do things a little bit differently.
Right. Trans-border, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're no longer staying within our own DOT jurisdictions. We're also no longer staying within our own state. We're processing these ideas and these initiatives and these movements practically across lines now.
And is that mood, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is that mood different than 3 years ago or 6 years ago?
Absolutely. Absolutely different. When we came in 2015, that was not the mood at the time. The mood at the time was, here's this huge problem in the future. We'll see what happens. But the conversations, I mean, it's such a big number, right? I mean, just looking at Hawaii, 20% of the roads impacted $15 billion. Between 5 billion and 15 billion doesn't matter. I mean, that's either 30 years of my authority or 10 years. Either way, I can't afford it. So if we looked at that problem in the past in 2015, there is no solution to it. But as we systematically worked with different states on how they're looking at their different solutions, the types of policy discussions that they're having, now there's path forward. Now there's paths that we can follow to ensure that we can get there. So it's looking up right now. The conversations are occurring across the states. There's collaboratives that are working across the states, and we have an administration that's very supportive of a resilient system as we go forward. We're hoping this American Jobs Plan that's coming through that gives us a big slug of money to help a lot of the states with either
exactly this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If it gets passed, okay. Let's take some questions. I'm gonna once again solicit questions. The best place to put them is in the chat. The little chat button is down on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and I'll throw some questions out. But if you want to ask questions, just type them in. I don't think we want to go with the raising hand thing just because I don't necessarily know how to bring people in. Here's a good question from a woman named Lydia Miller. What are your conversations like with important businesses in Hawaii when it comes to exactly this topic? We've sort of been talking as if Hawaii were this kind of bucolic place of ordinary people living adjacent to the beautiful Pacific Ocean with a Ed Sniffen highway between them and the beach. But hotel chains and insurance companies, are they realistic? Are they pulling in the right direction? Do you have an example of someone calling you and saying, what in the world are you thinking? Or just the opposite? Why aren't you we've done our own stuff. Why aren't you further ahead? How do you work with them?
That's a really good question, because community buy-in to anything we do is important. Otherwise, we start getting friction on the steps we want to take. That just doesn't help anybody. So we've pulled in, after working with our legislature, we've pulled in the Hawaii Business Roundtable. Those are all the executives from the different businesses across the state, including banks and hotel chains and the like. We had conversations with them to let them know what we see based on the inundation maps, what we believe is necessary to move forward, and how we can systematically do it so that everybody can plan for the future. I cannot tell anybody it's going to come out great for you, but I can say, I just can't. But I can say that if we can take these systematic steps we're going through, that everybody's planful as we go forward, it's going to come out the best that we can make it together throughout the state. And everybody appreciates that. I'm not going to lie to anybody to say that we can solve all your issues, but I can tell them that we can help address those concerns now to ensure that your business, our roadway, the beach are protected at this time. But here's the timeframes that we believe that these areas are going to be impacted. So let's all work on planning out what it's going to look like to ensure that your business, your residents, our roadway, our beaches are protected as long as possible, but we have plans to address them as the need arises.
Okay, but let me just push back a minute on behalf of Linda. Do you get you must get some negative reaction, like my hotel's not going anywhere, my customers aren't going anywhere. We've been here for 50 years. You're just a doomsayer.
Yeah, there's definitely discussions with some of the Waikiki businesses that you must protect us. We are the engine of, we're the economic engine of the state, and you, regardless of what happens, you must protect us.
Right. I can exactly imagine, like, no, do it our way.
Yeah, but 90% of the businesses totally understand the perspective that's coming through. Again, I'm not going to fight Mother Nature. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to come out pretty if we do. So we got to have plans to address what Mother Nature is going to do. Now, definitely, we can have alternatives as we go forward. At this time, by 2100, we believe that this is the inundation that's going to occur. In the next 5 years, when we do another modeling, there could be an adjustment. Could look better for us, or it could look much, much worse. But we're going to have to make sure that we set plans going forward that react to the new sciences that are coming through, the new models that are coming through, and taking into account what can and cannot happen. Again, it's not me subjectively saying this is what I think is going to happen. This is based on science. We're looking at the science and making those plans based on that. So there's going to be negativity that comes through. There's nothing I can do about that except keep moving forward on what we believe is necessary on the planning process.
You've been in this job 6 years. It's very
Yes.
clear. It's very clear that these kind of departments need senior leaders who stay around. You couldn't be doing what you're doing if you had an 18-month tenure, right? Give us a little sense of how you think about staffing and how important that is at these, oftentimes the number one, the number two, the number three turnover. We're seeing that in Washington, D.C. right now, right? The Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, literally a carousel in really important jobs where all three of those administrations have taken a different approach in succession. That doesn't actually work with land planning or with beach replenishment or with thinking 50 years ahead. How do you fit that in? And I don't see any fresh questions, so let's call this the last question. Talk as long as you want.
So that consistency is super important. It will never come from changing administrations. Our governor's been in since 2015. The term ends in 2 years. So I could be fired in a year and a half. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. So in order to make sure things stick around, we got to ensure that our mission is data-driven, data and community-driven. So what we do at DOT is make sure that we publish all the data that we have on how we make decisions, whether it's volumes of vehicles that use a roadway, whether it's a safety issue on the roadways, fatalities, whether it's the condition of the roadway, good, fair, or poor, whatever it is. We want to make sure we show it and share it with the community, so they understand how we're making decisions day to day on the infrastructure that we have. Same goes for climate change. But that data has to be out there for everybody to own, because it's not going to be just the department that's going to push this. If we come to agreements on how we move forward, and everybody takes those actions to move forward, it has to be owned by the community, by the legislature, by the businesses, to ensure that everybody says, hey, the data is here. This is what we're looking at. This is the trends that we need to consider, and these are the steps that we need to take. So this lives beyond Ed Sniffen. It has to. If we're going to make those definitive and I guess goal-changing approaches to things, it has to live beyond me. So pushing the department to be data and community-driven is the way we have to go. The last thing that we want is for an administration to come in and start changing course from what we all know is important. And they can't do it if the community and the businesses own the data and own the steps moving forward. Everybody responds to the political pressure. So I'm hoping that we can build that pressure towards what in the end we all need. So I would love to stick around in this job. But I think in order to do what I'm doing, I have to be ready to be fired every day. So when we start pushing forward on broadband, when I start throwing out an idea that I'm going to put 25 million into a project that's not necessarily within my wheelhouse, I got to know that if the governor pushes back and says, you're crazy, you're not going to do it, I'm going to fire you. And I got to be okay with that. When we start pushing forward on using new materials on the highways that's never been used before, to ensure that we get longer life, so we can reduce the CO2 emissions that come out of our operations. I gotta assume that somebody may push back on it, that may not like my approach. And if they don't, but I believe it's the right thing to do, I'll leave. So all of those things have to happen. I gotta be ready to leave every day to ensure that we can keep pushing forward hard on these different things.
But it sounds like you're trying to create a foundation of what I, as a journalist, would call transparency. Here's the record. Here's the data on which the decisions are built. And so you can get rid of me, but you can't scrub the data. And by the way, all the communities, the residential communities and the business communities, and in Hawaii, I assume the conservation communities, they all have that data too. So
exactly.
you can fire me, but you can't fire the facts. So
exactly, and they keep wanting it because we keep updating it monthly. They expect it. We have emails every month. If we don't update on the day that we say we're going to do it, we get emails coming in saying, "Hey, where's the new data?" So clearly, people like it. Clearly, they expect it, and clearly, they're going to continue to want it even after this administration is done. Which means that they're going to hold it and push forward, or hold us accountable, hold us, DOT and the state, accountable to what the data says, which is exactly what we want to have on this conversation.
All right. This has been such a great conversation, Ed, and I just want to underscore that the reason we asked you to kick us off is because you wrangle every day with water and its impact on what your main job is, and what your core job is. And you can see what's coming, and yet you're not ignoring it, which is one traditional response. You're not panicking, and you're trying to pull people along into a different way of framing these problems so that you get good community input, you get the widest possible definition of what you're doing. And I love what you said. You sort of leave behind this notion of, if you fight Mother Nature, in the end, you're going to lose. I think having volcanoes right there on site it helps in that conversation about Mother Nature. All right, Ed, thank you so much. I think we're going to pitch this back to Dean. You all can find Ed really easily if he said something. I don't want to inundate you with email, but if he said something you want to follow up on, and thanks so much for joining us. And we are so happy to set you loose at 5:20 in the morning. There, you can go get a few other things done.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks very much, Charles and Ed. That was a great session. You were talking about change that was going on and how to maintain the consistency. I think you also are starting with the high school students, and that's going to be a strong consistency going forward as well. And the other thing, Ed, as I commented in the chat, is what you made me think. Within the water sector, we talk about one water and how the connection between drinking water and wastewater and stormwater. What you've really helped open up my mind to is the idea of one infrastructure. We have to see how all of this is tied together: water, broadband, roads as well. So it's a great connection. Thanks, Charles and Ed, for a great session. I want to thank also our sponsors for the summit, A.O. Smith and Baird as our presenting sponsors, as well as our other summit leader sponsors. Let me switch over to our next video that we'd like to show you, that we have created as one of our success stories. We're going to be showing these throughout the summit, and at the end, in the next few weeks, we will have a series of 6 summits. So if you could do the video, Nick, that would be great.
Well, as they say, water is life. Without it, life cannot exist.
Water is used in every process. It is the universal solvent. Our responsibility here at Clearwater is to be good stewards of water so that life can exist for generations to come.
The
personal and business plan to be an actor in the US market with my technology, with the technology of Sigma DAF, working with Clearwater and working with the Water Council.
The relationship with Sigma and DAF is truly a win-win situation in that we get to learn about new markets that we haven't been a part of, and they get to break into the American market. And so this relationship really has been wonderful for both parties in increasing our reach and the opportunities available to us.
For us, it's clear that the Water Council was the key and to help us and to give us the support to introduce ourselves in the wastewater American, let's say, market.
If the Water Council did not introduce us to Sigma DAF, we certainly would not be manufacturing dissolved air flotation clarifiers, and so all of these different markets and potential clients would not be available to us. We wouldn't be playing in that sandbox, if you will. So we're extremely grateful to the Water Council for making that introduction.
For a company like us, we are not a big company, we're a medium company, to land in a market with the complexity of the United States. It's very important to be with a good friend close to us, to advise us with the difficulties and to find the best partner.
We're really looking forward to working with a Spanish company and helping to expand our reach beyond the borders of the U.S.
We are building connections that cross all borders. Join our hub where water works.
Very good. And I want to thank the team from Source 10 for putting that video together, and stay tuned for a series of a few more coming up. And to close this out, we are going to show our next Brew video. Again, this is companies that participated in our Brew 2.0 program in February as part of their pitch, and to get you a little bit acquainted to some new technologies by companies from across the entire world. Nick, go ahead with the Brew pitch.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie McClare, and I'm the CEO of SwirlTex. Our vision at SwirlTex is to help industries recycle their wastewater instead of releasing it to the environment. Why are we doing this? Well, there's leading industries that are trending towards this, net zero water use. Think Coca-Cola, think cosmetic companies like L'Oreal. And these drivers are basically water scarcity, regulatory pressures, and decreasing capacity to discharge this water. They're increasingly looking for ways to reuse the water within their processing, and we're here to help. The problem that we're solving is membrane fouling. And for those of you who aren't familiar with membranes, they're a high-tech material that allow water molecules to pass through and keep contaminants behind. And they all share a common issue, which is fouling. Membranes foul very commonly, and we use ultrafiltration membranes, and this is a very common issue and limitation. And so what we've done is we've created a way to reduce fouling quite dramatically, which means that we can use membranes where they've failed in the past. So how do we do it? We do it in a two-step process, really easy to understand. First, we inject gas at the right bubble size, pressure, and flow rate in order to manipulate the buoyancy of the contaminants or the solids or oils that we want to take out. So we create a buoyancy effect, and then we swirl the water through the membrane. And what this does, it creates a force which channels the contaminants away from the membrane surface, increases the velocity of the water at the membrane surface. And so the net result, you get more for less. You can have a higher throughput on your membrane, you use less energy, and you clean less often. Currently, we're making headway in municipalities, airports, and oil and gas. And we're looking to use this platform technology to unlock opportunities for the toughest wastewater streams to be recycled on site. Think landfill leachate, food and bev, mining, and access this growing water recycling and reuse market. So how do we go to market? Currently, we offer capital sales where we build modular systems and customers can use them to upgrade their existing infrastructure, for example. We also do wastewater as a service where we build fully containerized modular systems, as you see on the right-hand side of the screen here. And we're able to mobilize these very quickly to site plug and play mechanically and electrically at the customer's facility to upgrade their existing infrastructure. And what this allows us to do is have shared infrastructure between multiple customers. So if a customer only needs it for a season or temporarily during a shutdown, they're able to do so. And this unit, for example, is able to go from, say, a stormwater runoff project in the spring to irrigating a golf course in the summer. So very versatile, and customers share the benefits. Our leadership team consists of members who have built and sold water tech companies in the past. We're headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and some of these people sit in Houston and others in Chicago. So we're looking for partner introductions, specifically those in the industrial water sector, industrial customers that have wastewater pain points, such as food and beverage, petrochem, lagoons, dairy, manufacturing, textiles, landfill leachate. And we're also we're raising $1.25 million US, and it's a convertible note structure. We're 90% filled on this note to date. So please connect with me if you're interested in participating in this round. And I invite you to visit our website at www.swirltex.com. And I hope I can connect with you in the breakout rooms afterwards. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. We're not going to have actually breakout sessions so that you can get to talk and meet with Swirltex. That was a presentation she made again at the Brew 2.0. This brings to close our first day for Water Leader Summit 2021. And we will have this program available, recorded, and should be available to you later today if you want to be able to tune into it. Tomorrow, we will start again at 9 a.m. Central Time, where we will continue the discussion about the paved infrastructure, and again, looking at how it fits into water. And I think it's also very timely that there was an article just last week and from the New York Times talking about sinkholes in New York City, and residents in New York City saying that doesn't happen in New York City. That happens in Florida. That happens in California. Well, we're very fortunate is that we will have Suzanne DeRoche from the Office of Climate Resiliency from the New York City joining us, so she can talk about those sinkholes and what they're doing to prepare for more of those in the future and how to resolve that. So with that, I'm going to bring to close day one of Water Leader Summit. Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Ed. And we will see you tomorrow.